Welcome, everybody. As an introduction, I'm Dr. Patricia Mills, medical doctor, functional medicine practitioner. I did specialize in physical medicine rehabilitation, and now my passion is helping women like you learn how to thrive and not just survive. And one of the really important things about this is that you need to understand that you have more power than you think. Okay. And what do I mean by that? What I mean by that is that your DNA is not it does not dictate your health. Okay. And this is actually interesting because when I was in medical school, and I'm going to call this kind of like the old paradigm, because the new paradigm now is fueled by much more cutting edge research that we were not taught in medical school and is still not being taught in medical school or residency and that kind of thing. This is the information that you find if you're able to read and understand the research, and then something that you hear that doesn't actually fit the old paradigm, and instead of closing your mind down to it, which unfortunately a lot of us doctors tend to do, you stay open and curious, and you listen to it, and then you follow that research, and you explore until all of a sudden this whole new body of research becomes available that just changes your perspective on things like DNA. Okay, so what is the old paradigm? The old paradigm, and that's the paradigm that mainstream medicine is still operating within mostly, is that your DNA is basically like dictates what's going to happen to you. So let's say you develop, cancer, or you develop ALS or Parkinson's or multiple sclerosis or an autoimmune condition or hypo or hyperthyroidism, or you have like a family history of, cancer, you have a family history of Alzheimer's, diabetes, type 2 diabetes, high cholesterol, high blood pressure. And then let's say you develop that condition, right? You develop the condition that either your family had or you develop your own condition. And the old paradigm would say, well, that's the DNA, right? That it was written in the DNA that that's what was going to happen. So now it's happened, and that's just the way it is. It's your health, right? And there's some understanding that that you could alter it with like nutrition and dietary choices and exercise and that kind of stuff. But there's this deep down belief that, like, okay, well, this is what I have. So for example, with cancer, it's like, okay, well, I was destined to have it, right? And I can tell you right now that is simply not the truth. There's only about 2% of the diseases that we experience these days are actually completely predetermined by your DNA. And that's things like Huntington's chorea, where if you get the gene for it, you're definitely going to get it. And even in those cases, there is the potential to change the spectrum of experience within that condition, right? Same thing for Down syndrome, those sorts of things. Very genetically influenced, but you can still change the person's health experience within their lifespan. And I'm going to teach you how that works. Okay, so let's get down to the level of the DNA. All right, so we're down to the level of the DNA. Okay, and I'm just checking here to see if I have any comments. No, okay, great. I don't want to miss comments. So we're down at the level of the DNA, and so here's your the cell, right? Your entire body is made up of like billions of cells, right? So let's say we take this cell and we blow it up. And the interesting thing is, so there's the outer membrane of the cell, okay, and the DNA lives inside like the nucleus, which is like a little fatty kind of sac, and the DNA sits there, okay. And the DNA, I like to equate it like a piano, and the DNA is like the piano keys, okay. So yes, at birth, you're given like a piano with a set of piano keys, your DNA, okay. And with that DNA, okay, just like with the piano, there's not just one song you're going to play with that, okay? With that one DNA, with that one set of piano keys, you can play a multitude of songs. Why? Because it depends on what parts of the piano keys are being played, like turned on and off, right? Like you press the key, that the sound turns on, you let it go, it turns off. Well, the DNA is the same. The DNA is lying there, and the body has an influence on the DNA where, depending on what's happening in the body, certain parts of the DNA are turned on and turned off. Okay, we know that to be true from a very big level perspective because, for example, your liver cells and your brain cells, right? They have the same DNA, right? It's not like we have brain DNA and liver DNA, and yet they're two totally different organs. Why? Because during your fetal evolution, your body turned on the liver DNA to make liver, and it turned off the brain DNA, and it turned on the brain DNA to make the brain, and it turned off all the other kinds of DNA. Because you don't want to grow like an ovary in your brain, right? Can you see where I'm going with that? So your body, even from the beginning, was playing the DNA, and in each cell it plays it differently. So in the liver, it plays the liver DNA parts. In the brain, it plays the brain DNA parts. In the ovaries, it plays the ovary DNA parts. And there's some interesting conditions that can happen actually, where, for example, um, when I was working as a physical medicine rehab specialist, I would work with people with spinal cord injury, and they would develop this unusual condition where bone would start to form in their in the tissues around their joints, like in the muscles, which was very unusual. And what's happening there is that for some reason, the DNA in the muscle is now playing the bone DNA. It stopped playing the muscle DNA, now it's playing the bone DNA, so it starts to make bone. Okay. And that means that, for example, every single cell in your body has the capacity to make hormones, because to make hormones the way that ovaries makes hormones, your body needs to play the ovary DNA. But example, in cancer can make hormones, right? Because it's gone kind of crazy, and now it's playing the DNA all nutty, and it can even play the hormone DNA, and all of a sudden the cancer cells are making hormones. Okay, so this is really, really cool. What do we do about this? So, okay, so now let's get back to a picture of health. Your body's healthy. You've got your DNA that's being played properly in all the different body parts. And then things start to happen where that kind of DNA playing, that DNA expression that it's called, okay, it's expressing itself through health, is now being changed, and not a good way. And why is that? Well, what is it that actually plays the DNA? What turns the DNA on and off? Well, there's a lot of different things, but one of the things is the molecules, the chemistry within the cell. So what happens is that certain molecules will go from the bloodstream. So the blood is like the highway of molecules. So let's say, for example, a hormone. Like, let's say, for example, the hormone cortisol, which is a stress hormone, right? Let's say you have the cortisol hormone is floating around in your bloodstream. And let's say you up the concentration of that cortisol hormone because you're stressed out, you don't have any coping mechanisms, life has been really tough, right? And your ability to like deal with what life is throwing at you is low because you don't have like the tools like breath work or meditation or mindset work, that kind of stuff, right? So life is just like rolling over you like a steamroller. That's kind of how it feels like. Well, your cortisol levels go up. Well, what happens is that the cortisol then goes to the cell membrane and attaches to the cell membrane. It's floating around in the blood, attaches to the cell membrane, and that creates a cascade of events within the cell which initiate like a chemical reaction within the cell. And the chemistry within the cell goes into the DNA and changes the DNA. It actually like turns on and off the DNA, okay? Versus, let's say, the hormone of love, like unconditional love, which is oxytocin, right? Oxytocin is basically that's the hormone that gets released with like when you're with your partner for a long time, and you just love them unconditionally, or your child, your baby, you love them unconditionally. Those feel good hormones, that feeling that you get when you know you're in perfect health and you have the deep peace of like being in perfect health, that's like an oxytocin kind of hormone thing. And the oxytocin hormone is floating through the bloodstream, it attached to the cell, and it causes a totally different chemical reaction. And the chemical reaction within the cell that is as a result of oxytocin versus cortisol is so different that cortisol will result in parts of the DNA being turned on that, for example, trigger inflammation. So now you have the expression, DNA expression of inflammation. Hypercortisol states result in an inflammatory condition, an inflammatory state in your body, part of which is associated with how the cortisol affects your DNA expression. versus you have your oxytocin hormone, which is your love hormone, that turns on, like it actually dampens, it turns off the inflammatory part, expression of your DNA. So now you dampen inflammation by virtue of those feel-good hormones that you're releasing. So how do you release these hormones? It's through the brain, right? So it's your thoughts, right? So for example, and I gave this, I've used this example before, but I'm going to use it again because it's so powerful. Let's say I get you to close your eyes, and then you open your eyes, and I say, in front of you is a person that you love unconditionally, your partner. You see your partner, and you perceive that you love them unconditionally, right? And you get your thoughts create this like, oh, I love them, and then you get these emotions, which is energy and motion, and you release the hormone cascade of so that thoughts activate the pituitary, which then activate this like release of oxytocin, and the oxytocin goes through your body, and it creates this chemical reaction within the cells, and it dampens inflammation, and actually it can even do things like the right kind of molecules will turn off cancer molecules, like cancer parts of DNA, and will turn on cancer inhibiting parts of your DNA. So that's how like specific it gets. It's really quite amazing. So now you've created this like chemistry of health, like that's playing your DNA in a really good way. Now let's say I get you to close your eyes, and I say, okay, you have let's say you're actually upset with your partner. There's been a problem with your partner, and now when you open your eyes and see your partner, you perceive someone that you actually are not liking at that moment. You might even be extremely angry at them, and it's the same person, but a different thoughts get activated, right? Different perception, different emotions, anger, hostility, fear, maybe shame, frustration. And then that releases the cortisol kind of activating pathway, and cortisol gets released into the body, and now you're changing your DNA expression to one that includes a whole host of issues, including inflammation. Okay, so now notice how I said it's your perception of that reality that matters, not the reality itself. So the reality didn't change. The reality is there's this person standing there, but it's the perception of how you see that person that is different. So I invite you now to think, where in your life can you consciously make an effort to choose a different perception about your reality for the sole purpose of being a detective and like kind of a scientist and experimenting? How does that affect your health? Because, okay, let's use COVID as an example, right? COVID is there. That is the reality. Or there is like an issue in the world right now that is affecting all humans to some extent. That is a reality. And then there is your perception of that reality. There are some people, for example, who have found ways to like they've seen a need in the time of COVID, and they've pivoted their business so that they can serve the need. They're helping people, and they're feeling extremely positive about the experience in a way, because they've adapted and shifted and changed, and they see it. And now they're like, okay, COVID is something that is an opportunity for me to help society. And so they're experiencing like oxytocin like crazy. And at the same time, there are individuals who, the perception and the focus, and not that this isn't a reality, but remember, you can't choose your reality, but you can choose your perception, right? So the perception is like fear and isolation, not just physical, but actually social isolation, and getting, tighter and tighter within oneself. And you can see how with that same reality, you have two totally different outcomes. So and that's one of the reasons why we're seeing this like plethora of other conditions manifesting themselves in the time of COVID, is not that so much that the reality has changed other than COVID, but rather our perception of reality is like now so polarized, right? It's either very, very negative or somewhat positive, that it's like causing these like hypercortisol disease states through changes in DNA expression is one of the ways that this is happening. Okay. So one of the things I do every day is I do mindset work. I do mindset work every day to work on my perception of things. And I try to see things every time there's an obstacle or challenge. I try to see it as an opportunity to help people, an opportunity to improve my mindset, to improve myself, So I need to do that every day. That is my drug. That is my health drug, is working on my mindset. And I can even prove this to you from a scientific perspective, because here's what's really cool. There is this phenomenon that exists in research called, and I don't know if you've ever heard of this, but it's called the placebo effect. And researchers like myself, I am a researcher. I've published over 25 publications. And when you do a research study that you study a drug, you're actually, the gold standard for testing a drug, okay, is to do what's called a randomized controlled trial, where you take a group of people, you randomly put them into two different groups, and then you give them each like a pill. One group actually gets the drug, the other group doesn't, but no one knows if they're getting the drug or not. That's a single blind, so they're all blinded, and it's a double blind if the researcher doesn't know which drug that they got, okay? So that's like the gold standard, a double blind randomized controlled trial, okay? Why do we have to do that? Because the research, every single study that does this documents a minimum of around 30% or more of these people who are in the group that didn't get the drug, they got the sugar pill, let's say, the non-active drug. Those people, 30% of them will actually improve. So they will actually, like, the condition that they're treating, whether it's like cancer or Alzheimer's or, that kind of stuff, 30% of them will actually get better without the actual drug. And so the researchers call that the placebo effect. You can call that a self-healing effect. Okay, it's the same word. When you hear placebo effect, think self-healing. And why is that? Because these people who self-healed, what they have in common is that they all believed that they got the drug, even though they didn't. That's what they had in common. And not only did they believe it, they believed it so much that they felt it in their body. They like felt the improvement happen, and they felt it so deeply that the improvement actually did happen on a physical level. So this is the thing, when they do the tests, the blood work improves, the MRI improves, like all those outcomes actually get better. It's kind of amazing. So these people actually harness the power of belief, and how the emotions of that belief, that positive belief, actually go into your DNA and change your DNA and can heal yourself. So if you don't believe in self-healing, that's the science shows it happens. Not in everybody. There are some people who have better, for lack of a better word, imagination. And so sometimes self-healing requires like a really vivid imagination of imagining yourself so well that you can actually feel it. And it's in the emotions, it's the energy and motion that you actually get the hormonal effect and the chemistry effect that goes in and plays your DNA differently. Like what I just told you here should just make your brain go exploding, right? It's just amazing. And did you know you can do the opposite? The opposite in research is called the nocebo effect, the noxious stimulation, okay? The nocebo effect is where you actually, the people who, again, in the group who didn't get the drug, okay, but believe that they got the drug, and they were actually deep down kind of afraid of it, and they actually developed side effects from the drug. And sometimes the side effects are like really severe, like partial paralysis. And the researchers who are blinded are like, oh my gosh, what happened here? This drug causing issues. And they go and they unblind, they see, like, did this person get the drug or not? They see this person did not get the drug. This person made themselves sick. They induce the nocebo effect. Okay, so placebo, nocebo. Pleasant, noxious. And if you want to, just Google this and you'll see it all there. So where in your life can you kind of take a real radical, honest look at yourself and say, where am I actually like making myself sick, with my thoughts? Like I'm perceiving something as being really bad for me. And so I actually am creating this like experience for myself. with my thoughts. So this is really cool. Like where in your life can you change your perception so that you can actually induce a state of health in your body with the positive emotions? And where in your life are you inadvertently, but now like more consciously making yourself sick so you can change that pattern of emotions as well? And Dr. Bruce Lipton, a PhD doctor who wrote the Power of Belief, the Biology of Belief, amazing book. He explains that he's the researcher who kind of discovered this whole field that's called epigenetics. So the old paradigm is genetics, is the DNA is the source of all health. Now the new paradigm is epigenetics. Epi means around the DNA, the environment around the DNA, okay? And he demonstrated that he could take one cell with a DNA and clone it so it's exactly the same DNA. And depending on what he put in the medium around the cell, and what's the medium? It's like the blood, okay? The medium is like the blood. The culture around the cells, like the blood, our blood. It kind of bathes the cells, right? He could actually cause this cell to develop cancer, this cell to be healthy, this cell to become like a totally different thing. He could actually change the expression of each cell depending on what he put around the blood. So I just told you about an inner thing that changes the body, the DNA expression, right? Which is your thoughts, which trigger hormonal cascades, which trigger chemical reactions, okay? Other things that affect your cell, so that's internal things, there's external things. So believe it or not, the food that you put into your body, it's not just about calories. It's about how it changes your DNA. Okay? So the food from nature actually contains molecules like things like phytonutrients, which give the color to the food that you eat, that actually go into the cells and change the way that your DNA is played. And if you're part of if you're watching this and it's December 2021 and January 2022 in this Facebook group Wild Wisdom for Women with Dr. Patricia Mills MD, I'm going to be doing a 5-day challenge called the Rainbow Diet, where I discuss the science behind the color and how it changes your DNA. It's so cool. And conversely, the scientists who sat at their lab benches and created ultra processed food for us, they didn't understand this. They were living the old paradigm. They did not think that the food that they ate, that they made, could actually affect the way that our DNA is expressed. And unfortunately, it does. And unfortunately, it's not in a good way. Okay, why? Because the additives to preserve the foods, the additives to color the foods, to create those colors that we are we're basically made to want these colors, but so they put colors in the food so we would want it. But the thing is, it's not the same. It's not the ones made by nature. It's with colorants, and these colorants actually have a very negative impact on the functioning of our body. So this is why when I speak about being very attentive to your nutrition, being very attentive to even supplements. Supplements contain molecules that trigger chemical reactions that change the way that your DNA is expressed, which is why you want to make sure if you're on a supplement, it's a really good quality one and it's the right one for your body, because you do not want to be altering your DNA in a bad way for your body, okay? And this is the power of it. So for example, I'm going to give 2 examples, one being Alzheimer's and one being cancer, all right? So Alzheimer's, there is a type of genetic predisposition for Alzheimer's, which is you get 2 genes of ApoE4, from mama and for dada, ApoE4. And that is a very strong, it really increases your risk of getting Alzheimer's, okay? If you have 2 ApoE4 genes, your risk of getting Alzheimer's these days is 90%, okay? But it's not 100%. 10% of people that they've studied with these 2 genes do not get Alzheimer's. Why? Because the environment around the gene is different. They are living a lifestyle that is not triggering the Alzheimer's expression. Do you see what I'm saying? Same thing with cancer. Like even the cancer that Angelina Jolie had, it's a very, very high likelihood that if you have those genes for cancer, you're going to get some kind of cancer, right? Some kind of reproductive organ cancer, but it's not 100%. Okay. And the really cool thing is that the new cutting edge science is discovering what are those things that you can change in your environment that will turn off the DNA, the cancer DNA, and turn on the DNA that actually gets rid of cancer, which is so empowering. It's so like, it's, and for some people, it's hard to hear because it's like, especially if you've had cancer, if you've, or a family member has Alzheimer's or something like that, because you might say, well, it's not my fault. Like you're making me feel like it's my fault that I got that. And I'm not saying that at all. I am not saying that at all, because the things that are happening in our environment to a large part are things that we were taught that we just simply weren't aware of not being good for us. And the people who were teaching us that didn't know that either. There is no one out there sitting laughing their heads off in some evil maniacal way saying, ha ha ha, I got them. Those scientists sitting at lab benches making ultra processed foods, they didn't know. They're not doing this on purpose to harm us, right? So it's not about trying to to experience blame or reflect blame or give blame. That's not what this is about. This is about raising your level of awareness so that you can understand that you have the potential to actually dictate your health to the level of your DNA, and you can change the way your DNA is expressed second to second. By the way, like the moment that you start choosing to perceive things in a positive way versus a negative way, boom, your DNA expression changes. It's that fast. Some DNA expression takes longer, which is why supplements, like if you're using supplements to heal a condition, like rheumatoid arthritis, they used omega-3 fatty acids, like an omega-3 supplement to, and they compared it. They did a randomized, double-blind randomized controlled trial with omega-3 dosing 3 to 5 grams versus Humira, which is like one of the strongest drugs, like, immune suppressant drugs for rheumatoid arthritis to decrease inflammation. The Humira worked right away, but it has its own potential side effects, right? The omega-3 fatty acids took 3 months to work, but at the 3-month mark, it was equivalent. It was the same result as the Humira. And I don't know about you, but I would rather tough it out for 3 months and get the same result and then be lifelong on an omega-3 supplement that will not hurt me, but will actually even help other conditions, because omega-3 is really healthful for other medical conditions, versus something like an immune suppressant, which makes you predisposed for infections and cancer down the road, right? So some DNA expression changes happen right away, and some of them take some time. And that's where the patience, the persistence, and the consistency when it comes to optimal health is so key. And the earlier you start targeting it, the better. Okay, so Alzheimer's as an example, we have very strong research showing that we can reverse Alzheimer's, period. Look up Dr. Dale Bredesen. Okay, he wrote the book The End of Alzheimer's. He's published research. He's doing research in the US, like real researcher people, like amazing researcher. He actually just published a new book. I think it's like the survivor story or something like that. And it's basically it's the people who he was able to reverse the ALS, the Alzheimer's. They tell their story. And so he showed, like he did MRIs of the brain. So with Alzheimer's, the brain shrinks, right? If you did an MRI, the brain shrinks. And what he showed with his protocol, the brain grew back again. Like another mind blow, the brain grew black again. The brain grew back again. And the thing is, as we age, our brain naturally shrinks about 1%. So not only did it not shrink with natural aging, it actually grew back again. And what did he do? He used nutrition, he used supplements, he used mindset, he used movement. That's about it. He didn't use drugs, like but very targeted supplement protocol and very targeted nutrition. And then there were some people who had like toxicities, so like mold toxicities. And so in those people, he had to treat the mold, right? And you have to go in and you have to even change your home. Like you have to move from your home that has mold. Like there's like 4 categories of Alzheimer's, and one of them is a very toxic due to infections, including mold. So it's just hugely fascinating, and it all comes down to the fact that your DNA is not your destiny. You are the master of your health. And what I'm telling you is meant to empower you. It's meant to give you a sense of excitement and hope and a sense of control. Okay? So if you're at the point where you're like, that's it, I'm done with experiencing poor health. I know I can change it. I'm willing to change it. And Dr. Patricia, I'm willing to do what you tell me to do to change it. Then you're the kind of person I want to work with. Reach out to me, direct message me, email me info@drpatriciamills.com. I'm starting a new intake of women I focus on women's health. We start January 10th, 2022. It's with my body wisdom practice. I'm as a health transformation expert where I guide you. I'm a part of your team. I help you interact with other parts of your team like your doctor. I create personalized supplement protocols. I help you personalize your nutrition. We do and detoxification. Toxins in the cell really damage the DNA, right? So we got to get the toxins out like big time. So I help natural, gentle detoxification, but persistent, and so much more. So what I want you to understand is that whatever you are experiencing, even if it's something that we can't reverse, it's something that we can improve your experience with at the very least. And whether it's with me or somebody else that you find in your care team, just keep searching until you find that person that knows they can help you. And it probably won't be just one person. It'll probably be a few people, because it's really hard to like have one person who has all of the knowledge, right? Like in my practice, I do pull in, depending on the person, I might have to pull in a little bit of like visceral manipulation, someone to do a visceral manipulation on you, someone to help with the psychological aspects. We might need to get some functional medicine testing ordered, and all those sorts of things. But it should be personalized. It's not cookie cutter, right? Because your DNA is unique, right? There is an expression of music that your DNA can play, and there is a range, but within that range, there's many different options you can choose. And I bet you that if you really thought about it, you would choose vibrant health, and that's what you deserve. So I hope that this helps, and share this information with whoever you can. We need to spread this new paradigm of way of thinking, because the world deserves it. It's a beautiful thing, and I'm really hopeful about it. And so going into the new year, I hope this is a message of hope for you. And I love you. I hope you have a wonderful rest of your day, evening, or night, depending on when you catch this. Bye.